Hello again, Card Warriors. Today I wanted to cover three brief topics. The first one is going to be PC Dead Race. The second one is going to be a little scuffle I got in with iStolen. He and I like to, trade blows every now and then, and I think that's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. And the third thing is going to be more of a Vegito consistency discussion. So I'm going to be covering all three of these topics and rolling it up into this nice, neat little package. So to start with, there's been a lot of attacks on the PC player base for being small, as if being small is indicative of not having any skill. So I don't think that that's a really fair argument to make, because if you have a group of 6 people playing each other, they could just happen to be the best 6 players in the world. Now, I don't think that being isolated in a single community or only getting ideas from one community is going to make you a better player overall, and I would never advocate for that. However, just because I'm stuck on PC, which is actually going to change because Brotherwise actually got me a copy of the PS version of the game, so I'm going to be on PS soon. I'm going to get my butt kicked with no card pull. But just because I'm on PC, it doesn't mean that I don't understand how the game is being played from other perspectives, because I have watched streams of people playing on PlayStation, and I have watched and looked at other videos that other content creators have made that have deck lists. I've bounced ideas off of people who are playing on different servers than I am. And I don't think that that's really an honest or integrity-filled argument to make when you need to be attacking the points I'm making rather than just saying that I'm ignorant because I'm a PC player. So if we're going to try and make that type of argument, I don't think that's going to really swing, and obviously I just bounce it right off of me because I'm not going to let that one stick because it's not even valid. I don't think that this game is so unique that I can't take my experience from other games. Like, I'm currently Legend and Wild for Hearthstone. I've topped at least 2 buddy fight events, maybe 3 or 4. I've topped more than 2 buddy fight events. Let's put it that way. I've got top 3 at a Vanguard event, which qualified me for nationals. I got top 8 at another event, and I've been floating in the top 16 of various multiple 100-man tournaments for various card games for years and years and years and years and years. I'm not saying that this makes me the most distinguished or the best player. I'm not going to make that ridiculous claim. But likewise, I don't think that this means that I can't take my card gaming experience from countless other games, especially since I like to incorporate statistics, mathematics. I'm a big fan of poker, and I like to utilize all of that information to create better and better decks and strategies and ideas when it comes to other card games. And just as a further point for that, I know Global Score is absolutely in love with his Majin Buu deck, and to be fair, I think that deck is really strong, and there's nobody on PC that has played it, and I don't have the cards to play it myself. So even just in theory, I can take a look and see what someone else has done and say, hey, that's a pretty good idea, even without playing it, because I have that background experience and because I've played various other card games and I've played this card game. So I really don't think that just because I'm on PC, that's a valid argument to state that I have no ability to ascertain what's going on in the meta. So you'll see that this is an argument that iStolen makes against me during this conversation, and I just wanted to preface that it's ridiculous. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So let's go ahead and move on into this argument, which is effectively a little bit of the discussion between androids versus Vegito. Now, he's not saying that androids can't beat Vegito, but what he's asking me at the start is essentially, how am I getting the green tokens to get out Perfect Cell? So in my actual deck list here, you can see that I only have 2 main decked green units. Both of those are Android 20s. So he's wondering, how am I ever going to get Perfect Cell out from my deck with that being the case? However, in matchups where I don't have 20, I'm virtually always going to be calling either 16 or TN fairly early. And even if I don't have a green symbol for turns and turns and turns, it is a grind control deck. I have a bunch of different other options to KO cards on the field or to steal them. I have a bunch of card draw to get into my 20, and 20 itself is also further card draw later on in the game, and my event cards again can bring out those other green token units. And ideally, if I get the Earth's Mightiest symbol, I'm keeping that in my opening hand no matter what. And that's getting me out the 16, which is getting me out another android, which could be 20, and that's going to cover my green symbols. Now, the reason why I'm running so few green cards is because I don't consume many green symbols. Other than for Perfect Cell, The only other card that consumes a green in my deck is Gotenks, who is also green, who pays for himself. So by using Gotenks and using his green consumption, I'm going to have another green token back anyway. So that's kind of the whole idea behind it, because I'm not using Perfect Cell to clear the board until after some removal was used on my 17 and 18 early. They use their removal, bring out the P Cell maybe, or bring out one of my SP cards, one of the two, and then they use removal on that, and then bring out the second P Cell or bring out my SP card, and kind of mix it up depending on what the matchup is, what I really need at that point in time. But like I said, this is a grind control deck. It's meant to stall. It's meant to build up my hand size. It's meant to get me a bunch of energy in bank. And it's meant to kind of wait until my opponent has no answers and then continue to board stuff and win through that kind of pressure. Now, my deck does have weaknesses, which I admit, and I'll get to that in a second. So this is just a shortened version of me explaining what I said. You said, nearly the same as mine, good versus noobs. Actually, it's worse than mine versus Vegito. Doesn't mention how. Reunification is bad versus Vegito. Yeah, I agree. So reunification is in the deck because reunification allows you to effectively steal any normal unit that you kiss. And that's really powerful because it's a huge tempo play, and it effectively makes reunification pay for itself as a card advantage card. So all of that together is a very useful strategy to utilize. And if my opponent is playing, say, Gug, Grow Up Goku, then they're going to have something on the field that, if I steal, will be able to let me get out my own Vegito, which, if you notice, I have Vegito teched in as my 8-cost card. And Gug is typically a later game card. There are some people who can rush it out, and if they do, then, that's cool for them. But typically it's a later game card. And then they've just took 3 cards out of their hand plus the 1 to bring them out. So that's 4 cards out of their hand. Vegito is an amazing punishment card because they're going to lose 2 more cards from their hand. So that's a -6 for the Gug. And then I'm also stealing one of the Gokus. So that's actually just such a strong tempo play against that particular deck that I feel like there's no reason not to use it. And there are other times when my opponents will be playing androids and they'll have 18 out. I'll kiss their 18, bring it back to my hand, and then play it out. And now I have a 4th 18 and they only have 2. So there's so many different ways to utilize the Kiss reunification mechanic to get some type of card advantage out of it. Other times I'll use Kiss reunification to steal their Goku, steal their symbol. Other times I'll just run the Goku into something else so that they don't get the symbol. There are 1,000,001 ways to use this. I'm not saying reunification is necessary, but it does provide some benefits if the card itself is a normal character and cannot be killed by anything on their side of the field. So that does give you certain options, and it's one of the ways that I do tend to get out my Vegito. Other ways would include using my 17 and 18 SP card to bring out the 4-drop. This particular 17 right here is made from this, and then I can bring out another one, and then reunification those, and then get out Vegito. Or I could just bring out P-Cell either by calling it through hand or by calling it through deck, because by late game, I don't really use my bank for anything. I'm just using the normal amount of energy that I have per turn, unless I have to use it to die, which is pretty rare. So I'm using Perfect Cell sometimes from hand. Sometimes I'll call a Perfect Cell with no androids on the board, and then call, say, this 17, then reunification, and that's 10 energy, and bring out Vegito, and then bring out the 17, bring out the P-Cell, I just hit a button, and kind of blow up the board there. So all of that can be utilized together to make these various different strategies that can help you get out that Vegito, and honestly make a pretty solid difference. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what the deck is and why it's using these particular cards. So I agree, reunification is not good in the Vegito matchup unless they overextend and leave a Gohan on the field, because then you can steal the Gohan with, say, your energy increasing 18, and then reunify those into a Vegito. And if you Vegito a Vegito player after they've gone in, they can't recover most times because they've committed so much to getting those cards out on the field that they don't have anything left, especially if they put a Gohan on the board. So this is a great way to actually punish them if they're misplaying, and it's an exploitative card rather than a proactively good card in that matchup. So I agree the card is not great in the matchup unless they're playing it badly. But if they are playing it badly, you can use it and abuse it. So you can also use reunification in the deck on your own cards. So let's say that you do have that Android 20. Android 20 lets you get a 17 and 18 out of your deck, and you can see I run 2 extra 18s for Kiss, and I run an extra 17 just to have it both being a larger card so that it's not hit by Monkey, and also because it has good stats and quick attack. So this allows me to get out extra 17s and 18s out of my deck, so I can have an extra copy of those. Reunification, bring it out, do it again. So this lets me get out 4 cards from my deck for the -1 of reunification, and then I can still get out any of my other SP cards because this is a 3-drop minus Vegito. So I could use this to get out this 17 and 18, and then go into a P-cell, and then I have 4 more 17 and 18s in my hand, ready to go. I could use it to get out TN, snipe something. I could use it to get out Gotenks, hit their face, or snipe something. So there are options. I could also even use it technically to get Android 16, although that will make the Earth's Mightiest Assemble a dead card later, and I don't necessarily want to do that. But it is still an option on the table, and that will actually net me another Android from my deck, so I'll get 5 Androids from my deck for that. So there are absolutely ways that you can utilize reunification in the Android deck, even in the Vegito matchup, to compensate for how Vegito tends to damage your hand size. Gonna take a quick breather. Whew, that was a lot of talking. Alright, so he's saying that he's using 2 of the 2-cost SP card and 3 battles for Earth. I understand why he would do that. This lets you get out 2 16s, which lets you get more Androids out of your deck, and guarantees that you're going to have more green symbols in your deck. I get that. And then the 3 battles for Earth lets you get out the Gotenks, the 17 and 18, and the TN. Assuming he's running the same lineup, he could also be running other good cards like Nappa. I think Nappa's a really solid pick in this particular metagame. But he loses the exploitative Vegito. And I think that Vegito is actually very useful to have because in a late game scenario, you're removing 2 cards from their hand that could be the answers that kill your Perfect Cell. And you can actually use Vegito and bring out a Perfect Cell and make it powerful and clear their board all in the same turn by using the energy that you've built up over the course of the game with your 18 that you're not going to use for anything else to make a really punishing play. So that's why I have my deck set up the particular way that I do. So I'm not saying that his version is bad, and I'm not saying that my version is necessarily better. I think they're designed to handle particular scenarios in different ways. I do tend to play in a more exploitative way. In other words, I'm trying to abuse the misplays that my opponent make, or I'm trying to abuse them building their decks poorly. And I think that my deck succeeds at doing that particular thing a little bit better, whereas his might work better for handling more generic situations with less thought process and with your opponents having more straightforward options and answers. Alright, so next up, I bring up that Vegito decks typically only have, at most, 2 ways to clear 17 and 18. Now, this isn't necessarily always true, but I know, at least on PC, they're usually running 1 Monkey, and that's it. And I think that that's a huge mistake, because if you want to have a play that stops 17 and 18, what are you going to do if they bring out the second one? So I think that Vegito deck should be absolutely running Petrify. For those who don't know what Petrify does, it's a 2-cost event card, and it just destroys any card that's 2 or less on the field. So this can be used to destroy 18. They don't get the symbol for it either, which is nice. It can also be used to destroy Goku, the 2-cost yellow, to stop any decks that are trying to get early yellow symbols. And it can be used to destroy, anything else that's a threat that's 2 or less on the board. So I think that if I was playing Vegito, I would absolutely be running Petrify at 2, and also potentially have Monkey as a backup SP card, just in case. And that means that you always have an out to clear the SP cards of your opponents. I know on PC for a while, some of the Vegito players, instead of running Monkey, they were running Nappa, because Nappa can punch 17 without having to do anything special off of Battle for the Earth, because it gives it quick attack, and Nappa has Piercing Strike. So he can just go right ahead and punch 17, and then they attack the 18 with their Gohan. And then they're pretty much golden after that, unless you played 2 17s, which normally you shouldn't do that in Androids because you don't want to overcommit. So there are Vegito decks that absolutely do have outs. I've happened to be running into decks lately that don't have those outs, although Vegito was dead on PC for a couple of months. And it's only just now coming back because 3 of the top players on ladder, 2 of them are new, and they're running Vegito, and then another one of the old players is playing Vegito again. I think that they've been having some more recent success with it since the meta kind of got fairly lax on PC because everyone was just playing Father-Son Kamehameha for quite a while. And if you have an answer for the early yellow symbols, that can absolutely just crush that. But then they run into me, and then they tend to lose. So we'll see how that goes. Because the way that it originally happened on PC was there were a lot more Vegito players, and then I was more active, and they all started running into me, and I just started beating most of them. Like my win rate was something like 85%. And then the Vegito players just stopped playing Vegito. We were down to one Vegito player who would just go in with Majin Vegeta, the 27k attacker, instead of going into Vegito, and then I would just tail cut it, and then we would move on with our lives. So it was pretty light Vegito meta after a certain point. So I do think that that has something to do with why the new PC meta is failing to adapt to the 17 and 18 strategy, because I did take about a week break from playing ranked very significantly, and I think that might have had something to do with it. I also mentioned that I will occasionally bring out a Perfect Cell from deck to clear the board, drop a 1-drop 17, and then reunification into Vegito late game to remove answers, and this only costs me 3 energy to do. So he brought up late game, but it removes cards, but it removes your cards. The chance of having dead cards are high. So here he's talking about Vegito, which he did not mention just yet. So before I was speaking about in general, and he did mention reunification is bad versus Vegito, but I hadn't gotten to the point where I was responding necessarily to that. Well, actually, let me see if I'm remembering correctly. So since Vegito decks typically only have... Oh, so what I'm saying is I will occasionally bring out a Peace Cell from deck to clear the board, drop a 17 reunification, and do that late game to remove answers. So here I'm just speaking generally. I'm not speaking about in the Vegito matchup. I wouldn't necessarily do this in the Vegito matchup. And that's why I'm saying, obviously, it's a late game play. Okay, I apologize. I needed to remember how to read. So he's saying that if Vegito removes your cards, your chance of having dead cards are high if you have combo-reliant pieces in your hand. This is true. The most dead card that I typically tend to have is Kiss. If I have Kiss without 18, I can absolutely just lose a game that I have no business losing. So there was one game where I had 7 cards left in my 9-card deck that would guarantee that I would get an 18 that turn. 3 of them were Exoskeleton, and I had another Android in hand that I could put back in the deck. And then since only 2 cards, then 3 in my deck were not 18, and one of them was 20, which would give me an 18, I was guaranteed statistically, if I hit any 5 out of the 7 cards left in my deck, I believe it was, to win the game, because all I needed to do was kiss their taunt, and then I had enough on board to get lethal. And it was that way for 3 consecutive turns. And I think I still won that game, but I drew the card that wasn't one of my 18s, or one of the cards that can get me 18, all 3 consecutive turns. Actually, I think I did lose that game. Either way, I had fairly bad luck, and I had all of my kisses in my hand and couldn't use them. And I think I drew a reunification, which was the other dead piece. So he's correct. There are ways to brick with this deck, but because Exoskeleton exists, and because Exoskeleton shoves this card back into deck, which you want in deck, and then draws 3 different cards, that level of filtration is typically enough to get you to where you want to be. And not having an android is pretty rare, given that this gives you an android. These are androids, these are androids, these are androids, these are androids, and this will let you draw into androids. So it's pretty rare to just not have an android, since I only have, I think, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cards that are not androids. So it's pretty rare to not have androids. And let me see. But typically the way that the deck is structured is it's not like Vegito, where consistency is borderline guaranteed. But, I mean, my deck is consistent enough to the point where I'm not missing having an android in hand for Exoskeleton, and I'm not missing having an 18 in hand with Kiss very, very frequently. Especially since I have Searchers for 1. So it's not super likely to happen. So let's see, where were we? So I said, after they've used their other answers, a board clear into hand loss is a strong finishing move. So what I'm arguing for here is that Perfect Cell comes out, clears a few cards on the board, and then we use reunification and get Vegito out, or we do it inverted and we just play the 17, 18, or it could just be 17s if we wanted from hand, drop the P-Cell to kill their board after we brought out Vegito. But either way, I'm still sniping their board and I'm sniping answers from their hand that can remove my now probably 15-15 cell and my 12-10 Vegito, which is a very, very strong late game move. And that's honestly what my deck is trying to do. I want them to burn kill cards so that way they have a reduced amount of kill cards, so it's harder for them to be able to recover from having those cards sent back to their deck. Even if they had another answer in hand, they're down to only a few hand cards left, and it's going to snipe their last few answers. So that's what the deck is trying to do as a finishing move, and that's why I'm running Vegito in the first place. Now he's saying that he thinks that my chances of summoning Cell aren't good because I have only a few green cards, but I explained to him why I think he's mistaken on here. So you can use a reunification as an SP summon card to get out any 4 SP or less quite easily. So you could have 2 18s, a 3-drop 18, and a 17. You could have out Android 20 and any of the other androids. All of those will combine together to make a 4-drop SP card, which could be a TN, which could be a Gotenks. And I could use those to build my green symbols. It would be a little bit wasteful to do that for the Gotenks. I could even technically do it for the Android 16, which again would be kind of wasteful. But I have all of those options to be able to better handle getting those green symbols, and I can just bring them out from my extra deck instead of having to worry about having them in the main deck. And even then, I have the ability to just draw a bunch of cards and get the 20 anyway. So typically, I'm not using Perfect Cell super duper early. I'm saving that for late game. And unless I'm using my 4-drop SP card to bring out 17 and 18, and then using my bank to have both the 17 and the 18 out, and then trying to go into Perfect Cell to clear out 2 cards on their field, I'm typically going to be using that card to bring out TN anyway, to just snipe the Vegito. So that gives me the green symbol, and then I'm secured for later. And I don't really see me too often, because I'm going to be playing an early 17 and possibly an early 18. I don't see myself having a 17 and 18 in hand that also didn't get messed up by being sniped by Vegito either. So I don't think that using the 17 and 18 to try and deal with Vegito is the play anyway. That's typically what your Judgment, your Tail Cut, and your Fight for the Earth, Battle for the Earth are going to be. So I don't think that I'm really trying to go for any type of early Perfect Cell anyway. So that's what I'm trying to argue for here. I don't have the issue of being unable to have a green so much as I end up with having both P-Cells in hand. This happens to me all the time, where I'll use an Exoskeleton, put a Perfect Cell back in the deck, draw 2 Perfect Cells, and it feels bad, but I mean, it's not super likely to happen, but when you're drawing 3 cards from such a small deck, you're going to get your P-Cells every now and then. That being said, I don't really have that much of an issue with the P-Cells being in my hand. I don't necessarily need them in deck in order to get the full value out of them. I just have to break bank that turn, as I mentioned before. So now he's saying, assuming you have cards in your hand. Now this is going to be addressed further when I get into the actual discussion of Vegito. I actually made this nice little whole thing that's going to discuss exactly why this is inaccurate. Now I said, since androids are a grind/control deck, in other words, their goal is to reduce the amount of cards you have and to stall the game out until I get out my big things. So that's the goal of androids. I don't usually want to drop Cell until much later in the game, and when I do, I typically want it to be what eats your removal anyway. So if I drop a 15-20k P-Cell, and I'm doing that when you have, say, 8 cards left in deck, I want you to kill that, because then next turn I'm going in with the Vegito, and possibly a few more androids. I don't necessarily want that to be what sticks on the board, but if it does, then I'm just going 20k to face, and you're going to die anyway. But it's the catch-22. I want you to remove my P-Cells, because that's how I'm doing my grind control. I'm getting value out of dropping the P-Cell. I'm getting tempo out of dropping the P-Cell. It is a major threat. It is too big for you to ignore. You have to kill it. Use your removal. Okay, now you've used your removal that can target a P-Cell, typically Judgments. Now I'm going to bring out the Vegito. And I just hit my keyboard. So that's how the deck is meant to be played, or at least that's how I'm playing the deck. So when he's talking about not having the Perfect Cell early, I just don't see what the problem is. And in addition to that, the deck has ample draw power. So when we're in the Vegito matchup, I typically, assuming that I know it's a Vegito player, which I do because there's so few players on PC, I know who's playing what most of the time. So I'm typically mulliganing for either 20 or Exoskeleton, because both of those are hard +1s to hand. And then I'm also mulliganing for 17. And I don't really care if I have 18 or not early. If I do, that's fine. If I don't, that's fine. Because I'm not trying to get out the barrier, and I'm not trying to have that protect my face, because I don't think that barrier protects your face. I think that that's meant to be cleared. It's meant to use some of their resources to bring out an answer that can deal with that. And then in doing so, I try to swing the tempo back into my favor, because these cards are super cheap to play. They're super energy efficient, and they create that barrier. My opponent has to expend more energy to try and remove them. So, the monkey cards are either a 4 energy event card or a 6 energy SP card. And he could bring either of those out, and if he does, he's just lost a massive amount of tempo. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that they do bring out Monkey. So they bring out Monkey. What's going to happen? Well, if they're bringing out Monkey, sorry, I love doing that. If they're bringing out, Ape Gohan, what's going to end up happening is they're going to have to use an SP summon card to bring it out, or they're going to have to use a 4 energy event card. Both of those are just going to slow anything they were going to do that turn down to nothing. So if they do bring out the SP event card, that means that they had to dedicate an entire SP slot to that. And if it's a Vegito deck, hypothetically, that means they only have one other SP card if they're running 3 Vegitos. So that means that I'm already not going to have to worry about a whole lot of other potential things that could cause me issues. So one of the things that can cause me problems would be, say, a Nappa. Nappa has 8,000 HP, has Guard, and has Piercing Strike, so he can punch my 17, and then he's still got the fairly thick body that he needs to be able to keep me from doing something next turn, and I have to run a 4K into it next turn. So there are other things that they can't be using because they're using that. And they also have to have an SP summon card to bring it out. So are they running an SP summon card, like a normal SP summon card that brings out a 6-drop? Because those are typically about 5 to 6 energy. And if they're playing that, then they're losing 5 to 6 energy just to deal with my 17 and 18. Are they using a reunification on it? Because if they do, that's huge. Because now I'm forcing them to discard my 17 and 18, and I get symbols for it. And that's actually a better deal for me than losing 2 cards in my hand and them having some other way to clear it. So because of that dynamic, this actually works out very well in the Vegito matchup. So either they're expending a butt ton of energy to use a specific SP card to bring out that Monkey Gohan, or they're wasting a reunification and thus what would have been a Vegito to take out my 17 and 18. So that's actually huge for us, and it's actually a big advantage for us. Because, again, like I said, I'm typically aiming to keep cards in my hand that are +1s, and by at this point in the game, I should have used one or both. So let's just say I got one, just one Exoskeleton, and that's a hard +1. So I've kept them from discarding 2 more cards by making them discard these 2 specific cards. In the end, that's going to keep my hand size much larger than what it would have been otherwise, and it's going to make them less likely to snipe one of my responses to them having those big units on the board, and I have plenty of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, technically 7, 8, possibly 9, 10, and if I do use reunification, I have to have some other specifics out. But there are plenty of mechanisms for me to be able to deal with those Vegitos, and if they're not sniping my hand cards because they have to deal with the board, all the better for me. Alright, so let's see. I mentioned typically I have used a +1 at this point, so the first Vegito is only a net -1 versus my total net advantage, and I've thinned my deck for answers. So what he's saying is, overcommitting early, single targets are sufficient. I have read enough, thank you. When I'm saying usually Vegito players avoid overcommitting early, and I think I may not have read that line. So let me just make sure I did. Usually Vegito players avoid overcommitting early, and single target kill cards are sufficient to board clear. This is assuming they drop a single Vegito. If they're dropping a single Vegito to the board, then you can use any given amount of cards to trade 1 for 1. So, you have your tail cuts, you have your fight for the earth, so on and so forth. Those can all clear a single Vegito from the board, and then their board is cleared, because they only dropped 1 Vegito. They are typically going to kill my 17, which is true most of the time. They like to kill 17. So 20 is now live, which means I get to draw another 17 and 18 from my deck, giving me another +1. If I've used the exoskeleton and then used the 20, my net card disadvantage from them using a single Vegito is actually gone. I have completely broken even. Exoskeleton also fixes bricking and shoves perfect cells back into my deck if I drew them early. If my hand is cluttered with perfect cells, then Vegito can actually be a benefit to countering itself by putting them back into the deck so that I can get them out for just 2 symbols instead of for paying their energy cost from my hand. So I was saying that, there are advantages that the Android deck has versus Vegito, and those are the advantages. Now he's saying overcommitting early. Now, what I mean by overcommitting early is if you play a single Vegito and then drop both of your Gohans, that's stupid. Like, that is just objectively stupid, because if your opponent can kill both of your Gohans, you can't use reunification for the rest of the game. That's just done. And at that point, you've only played one Vegito. You're not getting out 2 more SPs from your deck, and your reunifications are now dead cards in your hand, and the rest of your deck primarily is draw cards to try and get out those Gohans and reunifications, and those are dead too. So what I'm saying is overcommitting early as a Vegito player, in this case by dropping the Gohans when you only have one Vegito out, is objectively stupid. So I don't think he understood my argument here, and I think that there's a reason for that. Why? I think there's a reason for that. So I'll get to that in just a second. But if there is only one Vegito on the field because they're not being stupid when they've only played one Vegito and don't play their Gohans as well, then yes, single target is sufficient to clear the board. So again, I commented, what does overcommitting mean? It means dropping all of your Gohans and leaving them on the board before using all 3 of your reunifications. I still think that just dropping 2 Gohans and leaving yourself exposed to having your last reunification completely sniped is a bad idea. But you can potentially, after you've dropped 2 Vegitos on the same turn, also play your Gohans, I suppose. It's not going to kill you. And if you're able to only drop 1, then you still have the 3rd one in deck and you should be okay. But I would never drop more than 1 Gohan, for that reason precisely. So he's saying, on Xbox, he's forced to use Cell turn 3 or 4 to get rid of the cards they placed on the field. This isn't happening for me very often. If they're playing a double Vegito, I would have to answer that a little bit differently. But if they're playing a single Vegito, this isn't really a problem, because you have single target cards like Tail Cut, which can just instantly destroy the Vegito, and it is effectively only 2 net energy, because you can break bank later and get that extra energy from it. So I said turn 3 and turn 4 are pretty different when you're dealing with a Vegito player. So again, he's saying I'm wrong, I'm saying I'm not wrong. He's saying the moment you said single target is enough, I saw a light at the tunnel, blah blah blah. So now we're just throwing insults back and forth, typical online stuff. I said if they wait to drop double Vegitos, which I would agree is ideal, then you have an extra 1.5 turns on average, and they have to draw into their second reunification, which is more problematic for them. If they drop a single Vegito and both Gohans and leave them there, they're just bad. And this is true. There's no justification for this. If you do this, you're just setting yourself up to have a free loss. If your opponent has any combination of the right cards, you're just dead. Because if they can kill even just your 2 Gohans, doesn't matter if your Vegito's left on the board because they can deal with that later. If they kill just your 2 Gohans, you got nothing left for the rest of the game. And I firmly agree with myself. If you disagree with this particular statement, which I don't know if he does, because he was misunderstanding my argument, but if you disagree with that particular argument, you're bad. That's true. Waiting 1.5 extra turns can also open up the possibility of all trained up memes. So they could actually get out a card that has 10k power, any card that has 10k power, all trained up, your entire board's gone, and you've lost your ability to reunification for the rest of the game. You've lost. The game's done. So then I said, personally, that has nothing to do with that conversation. So he's saying, single Vegito, what about 2 Vegitos, 1 Gohan, and 1 Frog? So in this case, the 1 Gohan is not overextension because that Gohan is still able to... You have the 2 other Gohans that can still come out. So that's fair. But he's also talking about 2 Vegitos, which is an entirely different situation. So what I'm saying is you're talking about entirely different scenarios, different stages of the game. Most importantly, different levels of bank, turn count, meaning more cards, and energy levels. Meaning that the range of responses and your ability to fish for answers has increased drastically, and your ability to have seen your exoskeletons and have already played them, possibly multiples, possibly played an early Android 20, or have one in hand ready to go, Like, all of that is true. And all of that ends up being a lot more impactful on what your potential responses are for the situation. So he's saying this happens often. I'm left with 2 cards, and they have multiple cards on the field. So in this case, well, we'll get to that in a second. He's saying, assuming they do this, it's averaging turn 5 for you. And this is actually kind of half true. If you go second, then it's average turn 4.3 or so. If you're going first, then it's I think I said that backwards. If you're going second, then it's more like average turn 5. And he's saying turn 5. But the question is, are we talking about double Vegito or single Vegito? Meaning that you've drawn 2 cards over what you would have drawn on turn 3. And he's like, oh boy, you have seen nothing. Now, I want to keep in mind, turn 5 is not turn 5 for the Vegito player, it's turn 5 for you, which means you add an extra turn. And turn 5 is also very dependent on where you are as far as going first or second. So I told him, I want you to do some math here. Double Vegito turn 3 is possible, but unlikely for going second. It's possible for turn 4 going first, but not that likely. It's not that unlikely either. It can happen. It's very likely if you get at turn 4 going second, which means turn 5. See, they end turn 4, you start turn 5. So what I'm saying is not unreasonable. So he's saying, you start first, 3 cards, by turn 3 you have 6. This is true, but turn 3 is not when you're losing these cards typically. And I'm saying it's borderline guaranteed turn 5 that they'll hit the full Vegito combo. And he's saying, turn 4 going second, I'm done with you, sorry. And I said, this is what we call confirmation bias, where people take note of things that are out of the ordinary so much that they presume them to be ordinary. You see this happening in card games all the time, where someone will lose to a deck that has a meme combo and think that that deck is so overpowered, then they'll actually try and play it, and they're like, why am I losing about half of all of my matches? That's exactly how it works. And it's not because you're bad at the game, and it's not because your opponent was super good at the game. It's just that you perceive yourself losing more often than you perceive yourself winning, because it gives you a more emotional response when you lose. And that's part of what we call confirmation bias. And this is true. I literally do card game math for fun. So he's saying, turn 4 going second, single target. We were talking about double Vegitos the whole time. And I mentioned that this is an entire change in the scope of the conversation to talk about double Vegitos. Obviously, a single Vegito can happen much earlier than turn 4. But turn 4 is about when you're going to see double Vegitos, and I have the math sheet to prove it. But let's go ahead and just keep going from here. So I said you might want to brush up on your reading comprehension, because he's now taking my original argument against single Vegito and applying it to double Vegito, which is not what was happening. We changed the entire scope of the conversation. We're talking about double Vegito and have been talking about double Vegito for quite a while, and now he's saying, oh, single target kills? No, that's a complete straw man. So I told him, you completely misrepresented my very clear argument, and I want you to read what you wrote as a response and read what I actually wrote and come back to me. Because what I wrote had nothing to do with single target kills, and it had nothing to do with turn 4 going second being applied to that single target mentality. So he's like, what you said shows I don't know what I'm talking about. No, it shows that you misunderstood my argument. So I think that this is about where it devolved and there was nothing left. Yeah, so that's it. So let's go ahead and transition away from that. I think that we've pretty heavily covered this conversation, and I think that we've pretty heavily covered the Android versus Vegito matchup. So let's actually look at the numbers. So you have a certain limit of total energy based off of going first or second, excluding bank increasing cards, which Vegito does not run. And you have a certain number of cards in your hand based off of what turn it is and whether you go first or second. So moving from that, we have the total energy plus cards needed to double summon Vegito going first. Note, every zero cost event card is -1 card to hand when played. And I want to make sure that we understand that, because I feel like that's something that sometimes gets misunderstood. So let me make sure that everything is available. Okay, so this is the only zero cost card that draws a card, but it says afterwards, select 1 card from your hand and return it to the deck. every other zero-cost card is a -1, because you have to use that zero-cost card from your hand in order to play the card. And then that goes to the graveyard, and you're missing one card from your hand from having played it. So Mom's the Boss actually makes you lose 2 cards from hand, but then you get a card first. So you lose a card, get a card, and then have to send one back. So this is a -1. And all of the zero-cost event cards are -1. -1, -1, -1, so on and so forth. Even if, they're all just -1s. So from there, in order to get double Vegito out, and this is double Vegito, turn 1 going first, of course, is completely impossible. Turn 2 going first is completely impossible. Turn 3, you would need to have 3 zero-cost event cards, and at least 1 of the 2 one-cost event cards that can draw 2. So you're talking about your To Outer Space and your Krillin Family Household. And you would need them to successfully draw 2, because those are, chance-based based off of what the top card of your deck is. So you would need all of that to align, and you have to keep in mind that these zero-cost event cards are now combo pieces. In other words, you have to specifically draw them, you have to get them in a specific order, you have to get them at a specific time. And this actually increases the total amount of specific combo pieces you need to 6. You need 2 copies of Reunification, you need 3 copies of the zero-cost event cards, and you need at least 1 of your 6 copies of the Draw 2s. And it has to succeed. So you're talking about needing 6 specific cards turn 3. It's not happening, mathematically speaking. This is not a mathematically relevant outcome. So this means at 10 energy, you can do the full combo without needing 0 cost cards at all. The variance is pretty in your favor as far as you getting that second Reunification. Turn 4 going first is reasonable to expect to get a double Vegito if you have all of the cards in your hand. So this means that the opposing player is turn 4 going second, which means they have 8 cards in hand when it's actually time for that Vegito play to happen. So 8 minus 4 is 4. That means that you have 4 cards. If you play a +1, you have 5 cards to try and handle the double Vegito. Moving on, we have going second. Doing it turn 1 is completely impossible. Doing it turn 2 is completely impossible, and I explained why it's impossible. It requires 4 zero-cost cards, but since each zero-cost card is a -1 from hand, you actually do not have enough cards in hand to have Gohan Reunification, which is what you would need. So you'd need those 4 cards, you'd lose 4 cards in hand from the zero costs, and at this point in the game, you do not have 8 cards, even if your, let me see, you would have to have, you can only play one energy draw card, and even if it drew 2 cards, you wouldn't have 8 cards in hand. So it's completely impossible. So for turn 3, you have 8 energy, which means that you can, in theory, make the double Vegito play happen on turn 3 going second with just 1 zero-cost event card. However, the probability of having 2 Reunifications in hand at this point isn't guaranteed. As a matter of fact, it's not super likely. With 2 fewer draw cards to be played over going first turn 4, and requiring yourself to remove a card from hand and have a specific other combo piece in the zero-cost card, it's actually substantially less likely to occur than you might think. So, while it is possible for this to happen, it's just not incredibly likely. And you are very likely on turn 4 going second to hit the double Vegito, and you're statistically guaranteed, as in you're outside of the 99th percentile to hit it going on turn 5. So this is completely different from getting the first Vegito out, which can happen on turn 2 going second, or it can happen on turn 3 going first in various different scenarios. It's not impossible to have happen. But what I was saying is, in those specific scenarios, all you have to do is just play a single blow-up card, blow up the Vegito, and now their board is cleared. So that's what I was saying. In this scenario, there's an entirely different set of requirements that have to happen. However, you are much later in the game, you've gotten more turns to draw cards, and with those draw cards, you've also, of course, drawn more cards per turn, and you've had more opportunities to get both your answers in hand and stockpile your hand, as well as your searchers. So this gives you more total outs to deal with the Vegitos. Now, what this ends up meaning is that the average double Vegito play is happening on or around turn 3.8. Sometimes you have the lucky player pulling it off on turn 3. It's not like super duper rare, but it's also not super duper common. But this is a fraction of games, and it's incredibly turn dependent. Consequently, this means that the average turn that you're dealing with a double Vegito will be either your turn 4 or your turn 5. And in both cases, you have the same amount of cards. You're much more likely to be on a turn 4 going second, so you have the card and bank advantage over the opponent who extended more total resources, getting their less likely combo out, meaning that the -4 leaves you with 4 cards that can either be in play, utilized in the graveyard, or in your hand. If you went first and they popped off on turn 4 going second, you have the same amount of cards, but more total energy because you have the entire energy that you got from going into turn 5. So all of this is to say that you actually have a fair amount of resources, a fair amount of time has passed. You could have played your draw cards, which if you're not playing androids and don't have exoskeleton, I still heavily recommend most decks play to outer space and run at least half event cards, because event cards right now are very strong, and this will get you that draw 2 more than half of the time. Anything that you can do to get extra cards in hand to pad your hand against the Vegito discard is dampening the overall effect it's going to have. And also you're deck thinning your deck of things that aren't going to be answers and things that might otherwise waste your energy trying to find the answers by having those exoskeletons out so that you can actually get into your combo pieces to begin with. So this is kind of what I wanted to cover. I think that the argument being made just doesn't actually add up when he's saying that I'm crazy for saying that turn 5, or turn 4 in this case, is when you're likely to see a double Vegito specifically. Now, if they played a Vegito turn 1, and then waited a turn, and then played another Vegito turn, well, not turn 1, but say turn 3 they play a Vegito, and then turn 4 they play a Vegito, I think that's actually a little bit easier to deal with. But I think that this really just shows that what I was saying actually made a lot more sense than what he was saying. So anyway, this kind of ended with turn 4 going second, I'm done with you, and I just don't think that that was a fair interpretation of my argument or what I was saying. I think that Vegito as a deck is problematic for various reasons, and I've mentioned those in my previous video, but I just wanted to cover this particular aspect of the discussion and kind of put that out there. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.